recording going. Well, yeah, it tells y'all. Okay, so welcome again. We are delighted to have Annie Pitts from the Extension Office here to share with us some tips and processes for parliamentary procedures or techniques within Robert's rules for managing our board meetings and taking minutes and whatnot in the appropriate fashion. So I am going to turn it over to Annie, continue to let more guests into the room. And we're just really glad you're here. And I'll have some closing remarks when Annie's done, but there will be time for questions as well as she goes through her presentation. So Annie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you guys for rescheduling this with me. The stomach bug went across my family pretty heavily that week. And then now I have the allergy, so I apologize if I'm coughing or taking a drink of water. This warm weather is just really bringing out all of the allergy pieces of my life. If you've never done a presentation with me, I'm just going to let you know it's a little interactive, so you will be expected to type in the chat, use the reactions on your Zoom, and that sort of stuff. But let's go ahead and get started. So, who is an expert in par law? Anybody? Raise your hand if you're unmuted. I have you looking at you on this computer screen over here. Give me a reaction, unmute. Who's an expert in par law? Or better yet, who's not an expert? Yeah, even myself can be, I get it wrong too sometimes. Par law, parliamentary procedure, Robert's rules, all the same thing in this presentation. Why is par law important? Well, it's the flow of the meeting. It's how we keep everything going, keep it all on track. It's making sure everybody's voice is heard. It's a democratic procedure, so we want to make sure even the people in the back of the room have an opinion. We want to make sure those are on the opposite opinions, they get to voice their opinions. That's kind of the why for par law. Par law, though, is beyond the motion. It's the whole meeting and everything. So you have these 5 pieces of par law that are super important. You have the agenda. Again, tells you the flow of the meeting, tells you what's going to be coming up. You have a chair. A chair is going to facilitate the conversation, facilitate the discussion. A quorum is your members, it's you. You're going to be, it's also in your bylaws about like who is, how many people need to be there to be a voting member. You need a secretary, someone that takes great notes, someone who can keep you on track on what the actual motion was said. And then you need officers for any officer committee reports, any of that stuff. So let me find my sharing button. Oh yes, because I'm on this one. You should see. You should see like a Jamboard is what it's called. It's a Google Doc thing. It looks like a slide and I have words on the right side. Yes, no, maybe. So we're gonna do activity. Like I said, I'm interactive. So if you're on the phone with us, I apologize. This activity won't be as easy for you to participate in, but this is a list of every piece that should be in a meeting. So what is the first part of a meeting? Unmute yourself and shout it out.
Call the meeting to order.
Call the meeting to order. Thank you. So I'm going to put that up here. What's next?
Minutes of the last meeting.
Minutes from the last meeting?
Yep, to be approved.
Okay, reading and approval.
perhaps roll call just before reading the minutes? and approving
Okay,
them?
so let's have a discussion. Which one's first, roll call or minutes? What do we think?
Roll call, you have to know if you have a quorum.
I'd agree, roll call.
Does anybody disagree? It's okay. Okay, so we have call meeting to order, roll call, we read and approve the minutes, then what?
I
think that's-
apologize. We might call it something different, but what do you mean by the communications read?
Communications are read. That's like thank you notes or.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Are you saying that that's the next
No,
thing? Okay.
no, I would say in ours, I believe our treasurer's report is next.
All right,
And how about unfinished business?
yeah. What's after unfinished?
You have a treasurer's report. I think you need to have that in the committee report somewhere in there.
So you're saying that the committee reports maybe need to be before unfinished business?
Yeah, I would. Because that kind
Any
of gives you
discussion
an idea
there?
what the unfinished business is.
Any discussion there?
I would have unfinished business before committee reports, hoping that at committee level, the unfinished business from the last board meeting was addressed. So you could address the unfinished business before committee reports, but I'm not an expert either.
Anyone else have a thought? Okay,
We
Oh,
tend to
go.
do our unfinished business, new business, and then committee reports. But again, that might not be the proper way. Not an expert.
okay. We assume over here on the left, what's left is adjournment and communication. So adjournment, we're gonna probably all agree is at the bottom. I hope nobody's gonna be like disagree. So then where would you put communication? So this would be thank you notes. This would be letters from somebody writing in to let you know something. For extension.
If we had that, I'd probably put it in there after reading and approving the minutes.
Right here.
Yep.
Okay. So this order, oops, oh no. Okay, this order of the meeting. Call the meeting to order, roll call, reading and approval of minutes, communications, treasurer's report, unfinished, then new, then committee reports, and then adjourn. Are we in agreement? Anybody disagree?
I put committee reports up here after the treasurer's report, all the reports together.
Is everyone on the edge of their seats just waiting to see what it's supposed to be? Okay, so, and we'll go over this a little bit later too, but every agenda is gonna look different. Typically, communications are read before you get into any business. So it might be after roll call. It's kind of like a nice icebreaker to warm everyone up. Again, it's usually a thank you note, or if you are on a committee or a board that's doing more of like hearing people's thoughts ahead of time, that's kind of when it'll be read. As far as this area, the new business, unfinished, and committee reports, where everyone was kind of going back and forth. Technically, committee reports is first, because the committee usually is solving some of the business that's happening down below, and they're just giving their oral reports. And if you want to get super technical, those oral reports can be approved. So if you had a committee for, I'm trying to think of a committee I've been on recently, for an appreciation award, you would give the report saying these are the people that we were thinking about. And then the next committee would go, and then we would have an approval of committee reports. And then unfinished business, new business, and adjournment. However, not everyone does it where they do committee, unfinished, and new. As clearly as you guys saw, we all couldn't decide how to do it either. So it kind of depends on how you run your committees. Okay, tell me if you go back to this presentation with me. Please tell me if you did or didn't. You did, okay, perfect. So, yes, we all have probably seen an agenda, and yes, we all typically know how an agenda works, but it's part of par law as far as how the agenda is set up, how it flows, and all the important parts of it. Moving into the nitty-gritty is the actual motion. So when you're doing business, per se, let's say you're going to move to give money to a foundation. The first part of a motion is you're rising to address the chair. You're saying, Madam President, Mr. President, or if you're in more informal, it might be their name. You're stating the motion, and the motion is not, I make a motion. It's I move that we give Rising Stars $1,000. It's a second right away, and then it's discussion. And that's where pretty much every board does it wrong. A lot of boards do discussion first because it's on the agenda as donation to Bright Stars Community Foundation. And then we start discussing, well, how much are we going to give? We gave 1,000 last year. Let's just do 1,000 again this year. That's typically the flow of how, at least a lot of board meetings I've been on. When in reality, it's the chair or the president of the board's job to say, this is the agenda item. I need a motion to donate to them, to have the motion, have the second, and then discuss what motion is at hand.
We do it backwards.
Yes, most people do, and that's totally fine. I can't
That's
think of a
supposed to
board.
be what someone said.
I don't think I've been a part of a board that really does it the right way, but fun fact, your discussion is actually after the motion's been said and seconded. That's where the chair's facilitation roles come in. That's where they're facilitating that all voices have been heard. That's where they're facilitating that, you're not rabbit trailing onto something else. You're not talking about other foundations that need money. You're sticking with the Bright Stars one. And then that's where they might see, oh, I need to restate the motion and call for a vote. So this is where it gets even more complicated. Keeping in mind that over here, this 1 through 6 steps of how to give a motion, you can also have motions under a motion. So this is the order of precedence. Being the main motion, think of it like a hierarchy. The main motion is the bottom. And the main motion is what was stated. So that was that I said I moved that we give $1,000 to Bright Stars. And then the discussion started happening. What might happen is somebody doesn't agree with $1,000, thinks it needs to be more. So they might say, I amend the motion to $2,000. And if you follow this chart, you'll see the amendment to the main motion is above the motion. So what this means is you have motions on the floor. You have many motions on the floor. You have to approve them in the order backwards, basically, is how I have to think about it. It's not the order they came in, it's backwards. So if somebody made an amendment to approve it to be $2,000, you have to make a voting on the $2,000. And after that's been approved, let's say, then you can make a motion on the $2,000 to Bright Stars. Other pieces that can be a part of it, which I don't see a lot of boards getting too deep in the weeds on this, but you can, in the middle of discussion, you can go right to the adjournment phase and just adjourn the meeting. And that just means no other business can happen. So that's why adjournment is at the top of the hierarchy there. Same with recess, you can recess for 5-10 minutes, but that means no other business can happen. You've heard of tabling discussions before. That's tabling the motion that's on the table, that's out there on the floor, and bringing it up next meeting. If you postpone it, you can postpone it to the end of the meeting. Let's say you have 2 agenda items. The first one's to Bright Stars, giving money to them, and the second one's giving money to Purple Stars. And you can't decide on how much to give to Bright Stars before you figure out what you're giving to Purple Stars. So you might postpone it till after the Purple Stars agenda item. You might defer to a committee, meaning the committee is going to take care of it, and at the next meeting, they're going to come back with a report, and then back to the amendments, or just postponing it indefinitely and deciding not to do it. So this is where people get really confused on that 1 to 6 steps for a motion from start to end can have many different branches. And this is where the discussion after the motion comes into fact. So most of us probably would agree that we're in a board meeting and we are discussing motions or discussing the agenda item, and we're already having the, well, should it be 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or maybe just 500 this year before the motion's even made. And then we come to a consensus and somebody stands up and say, I move that we give Bright Stars $2,000. And then the second, and then we vote. When in reality, this order of precedence is important because you're supposed to have the motion and then discuss what's going on. Are there any questions here? This is probably the most confusing part.
I have a question. So you had the motion on the floor for $1,000, and you have an amendment for $2,000. You vote then on the yay or nay of $2,000. If they vote yes on the $2,000, then do you go back to the main motion and vote on that, which would automatically be canceled because you've already agreed that you want to give them 2,000, but do you have to go back to the main motion and get it off the books?
Yes.
Okay.
So it would look like I move to change the $1,000 donation to $2,000. A second, a discussion, typically there's not. A vote, let's say it was approved, and then you go back, the chair would say, okay, back to the main motion. We have a motion on the table that says we're giving $2,000 to Bright Stars, and then you revote. I know it seems kind of silly, but you gotta, for record keeping, for the secretary notes, you have to do it kind of in this way. So when someone looks back 5 years from now, they understand how you got to where you got.
So what you're saying is somebody makes a motion and cannot get a second, then what happens to that motion? It's dead in the water?
Yep, if there's no second, the motion
Okay,
dies.
what if somebody says they can't get a second on that, but somebody else says, well, I make a motion, we give them $2,000 and gets a second.
Then the
So
$1,000
which one are we
motion,
voting with? We're not voting on we're not dealing with the first one because that died in the water. We're
Correct.
dealing with the second.
correct.
So each motion, first time I heard you say this, I thought you could take as many motions and then you start with the most recent, work your way back. That seems confusing to me.
Once it's
I would think you
seconded,
would want to take every motion that's made and deal with it right then. And then if you can't get a second or you can't get the quorum, vote that you need, then you just sit there. If somebody else is going to make a motion, then you deal with them as they come forward, but you deal completely with it. Am I wrong?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So you're right in that if somebody makes a motion and it's not seconded, it goes away. It was like it never happened. And then if somebody was to come right after them and say, I do it for $2,000 and it's seconded, then yeah, you are good to move forward with that. But if that motion for $1,000 gets seconded, then it's up for voting and discussion.
Right.
So then
right.
that's where if someone had an amendment for it. Or let's say someone gave an amendment for it, but then things got super, super heated again. So the third party and the member said, let's take a recess for 10 minutes, cool off and come back. You have to vote on that recess first before you can even vote on the amendment or the main motion.
Yeah.
Does that clarify?
Yeah.
Did I
I have a
confuse
small-
anyone else?
Yeah, I have a small question. So let's say the first motion that they stated and got seconded was for $1,000. And then the amendment after the discussion, they're like, oh, well, maybe it should be more like 2. So then they make the amendment to the main motion, but the amended motion is the only thing that you have to vote on. You don't have to go back and like deny the first motion of $1,000, right?
You still need to vote on both motions.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yes, so you'll vote that we're changing it to 2,000, yay, nay, raise hands. And then you'll go back to that main one and say, okay, we need to vote on giving 2,000 to Bright Stars.
And
Most-
until that motion that's on the floor is dealt with, nobody can add an amendment to it. Is that correct? Because you
Explain
have
what,
to deal with the motion on the item that's on the floor. And you
Well, you
can't be adding amendments to it
you can
That's
add
just-
amendments to it
without voting on it.
without voting, yes.
Really? What if it was voted down? Now what happens to the amendments? You start all over again, right?
Well, you vote on the amendment first before the main motion. Give me an example.
It sure make it confusing, don't they?
Yeah.
So
That's not
if you,
easy.
Well, it's not confusing.
if
I
you
would
were
think if
to,
you got a second, let's go back to the original amendment. It's proposed, somebody seconds it. All right, and then somebody else, another member of the committee says, well, I'd like to amend that to add $1,000, make it $2,000. My inclination would be, no, we can't do that until we make sure this proposal is approved. And then if you want to add, if you want to bring an amendment to it, then you can bring that amendment, we vote on that. Is that?
not
You're
exactly,
shaking your head, so that's not right.
not exactly, because once you vote on the motion, that's what you're gonna do.
Ground machine off my truck.
So if you're going to give $1,000 and voted yes,
You will help me.
and then you vote yes, and then you have somebody be like, oh, I think we should give $2,000 instead. You have to have a motion to rescind the voted motion on, and then another motion to agree to the 2,000.
Okay.
And that's where the discussion comes into play. The discussion really needs to be after the second. So
Right.
there might be some discussion ahead to explain like that we give money to Bright Stars every year, that we've given 1,000 in the past, to kind of explain the situation to board members, but then stating, having, I need a motion for this. And so then you might get up and say the motion, I might second it, and that's where the discussion of, well, do we really want to give $1,000? Should it be $2,000? And then that's where the amendment comes in and we vote that we're changing it from 1 to 2, because we all got to agree on that. And then we got to go back and agree on, we're giving it to Bright Stars. Clear as mud?
Well, the part that I don't understand, I get it all down to there, And I'm going to go back to the original motion that was for $1,000. Okay, we've already voted for the amendment. We're going to give them $2,000. Go back to the first motion, which said 1,000. Now, I would think then that you would vote no for the first motion because it says it's for 1,000 and you've already voted and wanted 2. And you keep saying you go back to the main motion and change it to 2,000. That's where I'm confused.
Yeah. you
Yes.
amended it.
Because that is where the amendment comes in.
Okay,
So when you vote yes on the amendment, then it's changing that main motion piece.
thank you. I got that.
If you had a first and a second, that on the main thing, that's got to be voted on. You can't be adding amendments to it when the
No, you
original
can't.
document has never been voted on. That's
No,
the
you
way
don't.
I understand.
The whole purpose of an amendment is to change the main motion. So after you have amended it, then you vote on the amendment and that takes care of the motion. You have settled the issue.
So when you go back to the main motion, you then vote on that main motion as amended.
As amended, yes.
Yes. Okay,
All right.
we'll come back for questions. We'll keep moving. All right, so there's several ways to vote. I think the most typical one we're used to is the yay or nay. They call for a voice vote the chair can call. This is really if it kind of depends on your bylaws. If you're looking for a 2/3 vote, like you need a 2/3 vote for it to work, you might go to a hand raise vote. So you can actually count the hands and make sure you're getting it correct. Versus a yay or nay. Typically, we've done yay or nays when there's no discussion, we're pretty sure it's gonna pass, that sort of thing. A ballot vote is where you write on a paper what you're going to vote for. This is typically done in officer elections, or if any time you need it to be more anonymous. And then roll call, I generally see this taking place in government legislation where the secretary would literally say, Annie, and then I'd say yay or nay. So that's the types of votes. In the youth world, we get a little creative sometimes and we have them like stand up for they agree, stand up for if they don't agree after, they've sat down, that sort of stuff. Virtually though, we're in a virtual setting currently. And we typically have virtual meetings, I think fairly often now. I have one tonight. And so some virtual ways to do your meetings is utilize the chat. So you might have them type in yes or no to vote. You might have them type in for the discussion. If it's going to be a heated discussion, my advice is to have maybe the vice chair monitor the chat, and then they can interrupt and say like, hey, Bev Nickel added from the amendment section that amendments naturally arise out of the discussion before the vote, which she did put that in the chat if you didn't see that. Or Becky, I'm sorry, I think I called you Bev, Becky. So utilizing that chat for discussion, you can use the raise hand feature. So in Zoom, under participants, you can, well, JK, under Zoom, they must have, when Zoom updates, I lose where things go sometimes.
It's under reactions. If you see reactions.
Oh, there's my reactions. You can raise your hand under reaction. And what that does is, if I put raise hand, you'll see my screen should have popped to like the top, even though I'm already talking, you'll see the raised hand up there. Yes, Ingrid and David did it. This lets the chair or people in the meeting know that you have something to say. One of the fun facts is you can lower your hand yourself, or as the chair or the host of this meeting, I can lower hands. That's a good way to get somebody's attention, especially when meetings are big like this. Reactions is another great way to utilize voting. My tip though, is it takes a minute for the reactions to come up. And it takes a minute for them to go away. If you see mine, it's still up there. It's still up there. It should go away here soon. There. So if you do your yay and nays too quickly, you might not know who said yes and who said no. Because it might take people a minute to find the reaction, to put it up there, and then it takes a while for it to go away. So just be mindful of that. And then there's polls you can do in Zooms. I'm not great at using polls because you have to set them up ahead of time. And if you don't know what the vote's going to be ahead of time, then it's kind of wonky to do it while you're in the meeting. There's other ways you can do polls with like add-in features like Poll Anywhere or other technology ways. But there is ways to have an effective meeting using Parlaw via Zoom or any other virtual item. Lastly, some things to keep in mind, and I'm going to kind of, if you're raising your hand, is it included in the recording? Diane, I'm not totally for sure if it shows in the recording that like I raised my hand, but I do know like if you raise your hand and I was like, Angie, you raised your hand, what did you have to say? Like that would be picked up in the recording. But I can't remember exactly if it actually pulls up those reactions. So then that's something to keep in mind too, if you're needing notes that say like you had 13 yays and 10 no's, keep in mind that you needed to count that too. Some other things to keep in mind, which we've kind of alluded to this whole time, is there's formal meetings and there's informal ways to use Parlaw. And we've kind of talked about that. Discussion sometimes happens before the motion. There's also informal meetings where people don't really understand how Parlaw works. So they do it kind of in an informal way. There's also executive sessions, and I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but executive sessions really are for specific reasons only. For example, this is for matters that are for non-elected people, so maybe staff members that you're talking about. It's when an attorney deems it's privileged. It might be about negotiation, anything confidential, but you can't go into exec session just because you don't want minutes taken. It has to be basically to keep it confidential. And even those are even more trickier, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but those motions need to say exactly why you're going into the motion, for how long you're going into the motion, and who stays in that meeting for the motion. So if you have guests, then they know like they exit and they can come back at 7:35. So that's a little bit more trickier. Extension doesn't go into executive session very often. I assume you guys don't either. And when you do, you probably have the rules ready to go for you when it's time to do it. And then the last thing, Open Meetings Act, is just if your meetings are open to the public, you have to make it available for them. The agenda available, minutes available, all of that. But what some people don't know is if you are a guest at a meeting, you actually don't have the right to speak or be a part of the discussion. That you have to be recognized, and the chair has to invite you to speak, and they can actually put a time limit on that part. And that goes into motions too. So saying if Angie was a guest at extension, I might say I move that we give Angie 5 minutes of the floor, and this is where she would talk about what she came to talk about. The best example to think about it is think about the commissioner meetings. The very beginning of the meeting, they have the public comment section. That's the time that they're recognized and able to talk. I think it's like 3 to 5 minutes. Any questions about that sort of stuff? Okay.
Annie, I'm sorry, I do on the executive session when you said to not take minutes or things like that. Are notes taken? Is there backup that's collected? Is it if they take action on something, how does that come forward?
Yep.
In an executive session, you don't take notes, you don't take minutes, you just discuss things. You don't even make a motion and approve a motion in executive session. We use executive sessions to talk about our staff at the end of the year, to talk about their their evaluations and if they're getting a raise. So we go in executive session, we talk about it, and then when we come out, we make the motion that Annie's gonna get a 5 cents raise this year or something. Yes, so Christine asked about what you're required to advertise. And according to my extension guideline that I'm looking at here for me, it's telling me that I need to do it. I think it's I just have to provide a notice of the date, time, and place of any regular meeting and anyone requesting it. I would definitely check your own bylaws and that sort of stuff on the Open Meetings Act. I'm not too familiar with like if you have to actually put it in the paper and whatnot. I know for us, we just provide notice, and then if anyone requests the information, we give it to them. Does that answer everyone's questions? Okay, well, that's my information if you need me. I definitely am not an expert in power law by any means, but we do use it a lot in extension and in 4-H. And I do try to keep people on track with discussing things after the motion and the second is made and not before. I'm also definitely the one that's like, oh, we had an amendment, we have to vote on that first, but I will answer any questions if need be. And that is my information in the chat.
Annie, I don't know how this falls into things, but a question I have is when you have committees that are also taking action on items and bringing them forward, and during those report times, should all of those minutes be formally made available to the full board? Or if they're, because they're revisiting action items to get the full board approval, even though like at our governance committee, they take action on policy to then bring forward, say, to the full board. Should all of those minutes also be provided to the full board, even though they're going to talk about the details of the policy?
You don't have to. I would say that the minutes should be kept somewhere for record, in the, for future need. So for example, any of our committees might keep records here in our office just of their minutes and such. But they don't need to attach those minutes to a board meeting. They just need to come with their summary of report, and then that summaries in the board meeting minutes. Now, if anyone requests, more information and wants to know how they got to that summary, then yes, maybe.
Thank you.
Would you have an example available, or maybe somewhere that you would recommend looking for how some of those things in the amendments look in minutes that are written out, so to speak, so that I know the proper appearance?
Yeah, I have several things I was working from, so let me see if I can find one right now.
Who is that? To somebody from the community fund?
K-State Extension.
Okay. Is that a meeting that's going on right now?
Mhm.
And the people there are people from,
Whoever that is, could you mute yourself, please? We can all hear your conversation. Thank you.
I have a more 4-H related document. It gives on like page 10, it gives more of like a very rough outline of conducting a meeting, but in there it has the motion. So it says I move to that we have an exhibit, and it was seconded, and then somebody amended the motion. So that would kind of tell you what it would look like in the minutes. So you would say Tom moved that we have an exhibit, and Sally seconded it. Discussion was had, and then you'd put like Julie amended that we have double size booths or something like that. And so then you'll see that there was a second for that amendment discussion. We voted on it, and then going back to the main motion.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that.
help?
Appreciate it.
I
Yeah.
feel like that was kind of confusing, but I think it gives a good rough outline. Again, it's a 4-H related document.
Annie, we didn't talk about this prior to coordinating this training today, but are you willing to allow us to place that the PDF you were sharing with us along with this recording on our
Yes.
website in our toolkit? Because I know there's quite a few people that weren't able to be here today, and some of us may need to go back for a little refresher and look at that detail.
You may use it. It's not a Kansas 4-H document, it's a Wisconsin one. And again, it's a very 4-H document, but the general styles in it and everything are true.
Are there other questions? Well, we have an expert among us. Definitely, I'm learning several things here today. I don't know about all of you. Going to share with you guys too, just to share our website. We have on the Central Kansas CF.org website, we have a tab up here, affiliates, and then it will have a toolkit section. And if you go all the way down to the resources, always got the people in the way. On the resource page, we have a document that is called Robert's Rules Basics. It is very in depth too, but maybe nice backup now that we've heard from Annie and have some more details for kind of the flow of discussions. But it goes through quite a bit, giving, comment on like majority voting and 2/3 voting and those kinds of things. So that may also be of help to you. So on our affiliate toolkit page under this affiliate tab, then you just go all the way to the bottom to resources. And that is probably where we're going to tuck in Annie's PowerPoint presentation and this recording. We'll just add some more bullets down here to add these additional resources for you. Any other questions, comments? We know we can get in touch with Annie just for guidance and direction, and for all of us too to go back to our various boards and maybe look at some tweaking to our processes. Will be in order. I again really appreciate it and value everybody's time over lunch here to participate in this training. So I'm hoping you are all leaving with more knowledge than you came in with. Are there any other comments or questions as we wrap up? All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. And Annie, thank you so much. I'll look for your materials and we'll get them posted on our website in the next few days. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.